There are certain stories Hollywood tells on a loop. The handsome leading man. The red carpet. The applause that never quite fades. But every now and then, a story emerges from the margins of that world, one that was always more interesting, more layered, and more human than anything the cameras had been pointing at. This is one of those stories. Keely Shaye Smith has spent more than 3 decades living at the intersection of public life and private dignity. She is a journalist, a documentary filmmaker, an environmental activist, a mother, and a wife. Yet for much of her time in the spotlight, the world insisted on reducing her to a single conversation, one entirely centered on her body. That conversation, fueled by tabloid culture and the cruelty of anonymous comment sections, never really went away. It simply waited. And now, as Keely steps back into public view looking visibly transformed, that conversation has returned. Only this time, the tone has shifted completely. The question worth asking, though, is not just what changed. It is why it took this long for the world to look at her differently, and whether the applause she is now receiving says more about her or about the audience giving it. Before we talk about the transformation, we have to talk about the woman herself, because Keely Shaye Smith was never simply a celebrity wife. Long before she became a fixture on red carpets beside one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, she had built an identity entirely her own. Keely Shaye Smith is an American journalist, author, television host, actress, and director. She is also a passionate environmental activist who has dedicated significant energy to documentaries and causes focused on environmental protection and animal welfare. Bollywood shawties her career as a television correspondent gave her a voice and a platform she earned through her own hard work, not through association with anyone else. And yet, the moment she became publicly linked to Pierce Brosnan, that independent identity began to erode in the media's telling. Her name became a footnote to his. Her accomplishments were compressed into a single line, buried beneath photographs and commentary about her appearance. The internet, predictably, was unkind. 4 years, stretching across more than 2 decades, Keely was subjected to the kind of sustained public scrutiny that no person, famous or otherwise, should ever have to endure. Her weight, her body, her choices were treated as public property. Comment sections became arenas where strangers felt entitled to assess her worth, speculate about her marriage, and demand explanations she never owed anyone. What made this treatment particularly striking was the double standard embedded in every headline that covered it. As Pierce aged, he was celebrated. His gray temples were called distinguished. His lines were called character. For Keely, the same passage of time was treated as a failure. Pierce once acknowledged watching his wife grow and change over time, saying, "Watching someone grow up with you and grow old with you is a very spiritual journey. To watch each other change, whatever it may be, the hair, the waist. But it's the love in the heart." Yahoo! He meant every word. But the world heard only half of it. None of that cruelty landed without cost. But Keely absorbed it quietly, without public breakdowns, without defensive press releases, without performing the kind of anguish the internet seemed to be waiting for. She simply continued to live her life, raising her children, supporting her husband, and advocating for the ocean and the marine life she had dedicated herself to protecting. She was, in that sense, far more composed than her critics ever deserved. To understand who Keely Shaye Smith is today, and why her relationship with Pierce Brosnan has endured where so many Hollywood marriages have not, you have to understand where it began and what it was truly built on. Pierce and Keely met in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, on April 8, 1994, a day she later recalled on Instagram as her lucky day. She wrote that she had no idea, walking around a corner and into his life, that her destiny was about to change forever. News it was not a meeting engineered by publicists or arranged for cameras. Keely was there on a work assignment, sent to interview actor Ted Danson. Pierce was vacationing with friends. After crossing paths at a beach party, the two immediately connected. But Pierce Brosnan in 1994 was not simply a rising star enjoying the first waves of global fame. He was a man carrying a grief that fame could not touch. Brosnan had been previously married to Cassandra Harris from 1980 until her death in 1991. Together they welcomed a son, Sean, and Pierce adopted Cassandra's 2 other children, Charlotte and Chris. Harris died in December 1991 after battling ovarian cancer. Yahoo! She was 39 years old. The loss reshaped him completely. Pierce was open about what it meant to watch his partner face that illness. When your partner gets cancer, then life changes. Your timetable and reference for your normal routines and the way you view life, all this changes. Because you're dealing with death. Women's Weekly. By the time Keely walked into his life in Mexico, he was a man who had already learned how fragile everything truly is. Keely did not walk into a blank slate. She walked into a life shaped by loss, by 3 children who had endured the unimaginable, and by a man who was quietly, carefully trying to find his footing again. And rather than being daunted by that weight, she embraced it. Pierce later said he thought of Keely as his North Star, always looking out for him, always kind and compassionate. Bright side. Their connection grew over 7 years of dating before they said their vows on August 4, 2001, at Ballintubber Abbey in County Mayo, Ireland, with a reception at the historic Ashford Castle. Bollywood shawties before the wedding, they had already built a family together. Their son Dylan arrived in January 1997, followed by Paris in February 2001. News. The marriage, when it finally came, was not a romantic beginning. It was a formal recognition of something already deeply real. Brosnan spoke about this from the heart. I had a great marriage which sadly had its own ending, and I was lucky enough to find love again. We were meant to find each other. I thank God for her every day. When Keely looks at me, I go weak. I love her vitality, her passion. She has this strength that I wouldn't be able to live without. Yahoo! That is not the language of a man performing love for an audience. It is the language of someone who has lost love before and therefore knows exactly what it means to have found it again. It would be dishonest to tell Keely's story without confronting what the world put her through over the years that followed. The criticism was not occasional. It was not gentle. It was sustained, public, and rooted in a belief that a woman's body in the public eye belongs to the public to evaluate. From the early days of her public life, Keely never felt shy about her curves. She never tried to hide them with baggy clothing.